Right now, we do have some breaking news to get to. Former President Donald Trump posted on his Truth social account that he expects to be arrested on Tuesday. This comes as a New York prosecutor is viewing charges in a case where hush money was paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 presidential elections. Trump is urging his followers to protest. New York law enforcement officials have been making security preparations in case Trump is indicted. ABC News has not verified the claims, and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has not commented about the post or possible arrest.
Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Get more great ABC7 content by clicking the subscribe button for our YouTube channel and download the ABC7 Los Angeles streaming app on Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, and Roku to watch on your TV.
Okay, so imagine you're watching C-SPAN. Maybe you've got it on in the background while you're doing something else, and suddenly the normally staid procedural atmosphere of Congress absolutely explodes. A federal judge has just released audio recordings and documents that have been under seal for months, and what's in those recordings is devastating. Trump's voice, his advisors' voices, direct conversations about disrupting the January 6th electoral certification, explicit discussions about how to pressure Capitol officials, planning conversations about what to do if violence erupts. It's the smoking gun that investigators have been searching for, and Congress is hearing it for the first time, live during an emergency hearing, and lawmakers are losing it. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. Representative Jerry Nadler is on the floor demanding that law enforcement issue immediate arrest warrants, not just investigations, not just more hearings, actual arrests. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is giving impassioned speeches about how Trump and his inner circle constitute a criminal enterprise. Other members are joining in, names like Pam Bondi, Tulsi Gabbard, and senior Trump advisors being called out specifically for prosecution. The language being used isn't measured or careful, it's urgent and angry. Lawmakers are saying Trump needs to be arrested now, not censured, not investigated further, arrested, put in handcuffs, charged, prosecuted. It's an unprecedented moment in American politics, and it's happening live on national television. This eruption happened in November 2025, and the shockwaves are still reverberating. Because this isn't just political theater. This is Congress, the legislative branch, publicly calling for the executive branch to arrest a former president based on evidence that's just been released by the judicial branch. It's all three branches of government colliding in the most dramatic constitutional crisis level way possible. And the audio recordings that triggered this, they're apparently as bad as investigators feared. Direct evidence of Trump coordinating with advisors to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, discussions about using violence or the threat of violence to achieve political aims, cover-up conversations about how to hide evidence and obstruct investigations. This is the kind of evidence that can support serious criminal charges like conspiracy, seditious conspiracy, and obstruction of justice.
Right now. Let me ask you a question. Did you get permission from your boss?
Why don't we sign on right now?
Did your boss, Donald Trump?
You can easily extend the ACA right now.
Did your boss, Donald Trump,
he's not my boss.
Yes, he is.
No, he's not. And by the way,
so let me ask you a
why
question.
did you vote to shut the government down? Why did you vote to shut it down?
Let me ask you a question.
For years, you always lectured about how we need to keep the government open.
You're making a show of this to make yourself relevant.
It's sad. You could easily...
The federal judge who released the recordings did so over objections from Trump's legal team. They've been fighting for months to keep this material sealed, arguing it was protected by executive privilege or that releasing it would prejudice potential criminal proceedings. But the judge reviewed the evidence and concluded the public interest in disclosure outweighed those concerns. The judge essentially said, this is too important to keep hidden. People need to know what their former president did. And so the recordings were released, handed over to Congress, and played during hearings. And once lawmakers heard them, all hell broke loose. Capitol Hill sources described the scene as total chaos. Late-night emergency sessions, security lockdowns because emotions were running so high, political strategists on both sides scrambling to figure out how to respond, Democrats sensing blood in the water and pushing for immediate action, Republicans trying to defend Trump while also dealing with the fact that many of them just heard recordings they can't easily explain away. It's the kind of moment that happens maybe once in a generation, if that, a constitutional crisis playing out in real time with unclear outcomes and enormous stakes. The specific calls for arrest aren't just rhetorical. Lawmakers are actually demanding that the Department of Justice, federal prosecutors, or other law enforcement agencies issue warrants and take Trump and his advisors into custody. They're arguing that the recordings provide probable cause for immediate arrest, that the evidence shows ongoing criminal activity and conspiracy, that allowing Trump to remain free while this evidence exists is an affront to justice and the rule of law. It's an extraordinary demand that goes way beyond the normal congressional role of oversight and into territory that's constitutionally murky and politically explosive. Senior Democratic leaders are backing these calls. This isn't just progressive firebrands making noise. This is establishment figures like Jerry Nadler, who's been in Congress for decades and knows how institutions work, saying that normal processes aren't sufficient anymore, that the gravity of what Trump did requires immediate criminal justice intervention, that Congress has a duty to use whatever power it has to ensure accountability, and other members are going even further, calling Trump's operation a criminal enterprise and demanding RICO-style prosecutions that would take down not just Trump but everyone around him who participated. The audio recordings apparently include discussions that are worse than what's been publicly known, planning conversations before January 6th about what would happen and how to maximize disruption, real-time conversations during the attack about how long to let it go on before intervening, after-the-fact conversations about covering tracks and obstructing investigations, all of it in Trump's own voice or in the voices of his closest advisors, the kind of direct evidence that prosecutors dream about because there's no plausible deniability. You can hear them discussing criminal acts, planning them, executing them, and then trying to hide what they did. The constitutional implications are staggering. Can Congress demand the arrest of a former president? What authority do they have to compel law enforcement action? What happens if the DOJ doesn't act on congressional demands? How does separation of powers work when the legislative branch is trying to force the executive branch to prosecute someone? These aren't hypothetical constitutional law school questions anymore. These are real, immediate questions that will be answered through the political and legal battles playing out right now. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly what's in those audio recordings, why lawmakers are demanding immediate arrest, what legal authority they have to make such demands, and what happens next in this unprecedented constitutional crisis. This is the kind of moment that defines nations, and we're living through it. All right, let's dig into what exactly is in these audio recordings, because the content is what's driving the congressional eruption. According to sources who've heard the recordings, they include multiple conversations involving Trump and his senior advisors in the days and weeks leading up to January 6th. These aren't vague discussions about election challenges or political strategy. These are specific planning conversations about how to disrupt the electoral certification and what to do if violence occurs. The kind of explicit coordination that establishes criminal conspiracy. One recording reportedly captures Trump and advisors discussing how to maximize pressure on Vice President Pence to refuse to certify electoral votes. They talk about the rally they're planning for January 6th. They discuss what Trump should say to fire up the crowd. And most damningly, they discuss what happens if people march to the Capitol and things get physical. There are discussions about how long to let events unfold before intervening, about whether violence might actually help their cause by creating chaos that delays or prevents certification. These aren't offhand comments, these are strategic planning conversations. Another recording apparently includes discussions during the January 6th attack itself. Trump and advisors watching events unfold on television, making decisions about whether and when to tell people to go home, discussing the political implications. And shockingly, there are reportedly moments where Trump expresses satisfaction or approval at what's happening, where he sees the violence and disruption as serving his interests. That's direct evidence of intent, of Trump wanting the attack to continue, of him seeing it as a tool to achieve his goal of staying in power despite losing the election. Then there are the cover-up conversations, recordings from days and weeks after January 6th where Trump and advisors discuss how to handle investigations, what to tell Congress, what to tell law enforcement, how to coordinate stories, who should take the fall. These are classic obstruction of justice conversations, and they're all on tape, multiple people involved, multiple instances of discussing how to hide evidence or mislead investigators. It's comprehensive documentation of a conspiracy to obstruct official proceedings. The judge who released these recordings cited public interest as the primary reason. The judge reviewed Trump's claims of executive privilege and found they didn't apply because these were discussions about criminal activity, not official presidential duties. The crime fraud exception to privilege means you can't hide behind executive privilege if you're using it to plan or cover up crimes. And the judge found that's exactly what these conversations were about, so the privilege claims failed and the recordings became public. The release happened during congressional hearings investigating January 6th. House committees have been working on this for years, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, building a comprehensive picture of what happened. And these audio recordings were the missing piece, the direct proof that Trump wasn't just negligent or recklessly indifferent. He was actively coordinating the effort to disrupt the certification. He knew what was planned. He approved of it. He let it continue, even when violence erupted. and then he tried to cover it up afterward. That's the story the recordings tell. When lawmakers heard these recordings during the hearings, the reaction was immediate and intense. Jerry Nadler, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, literally stood up and said Trump needs to be arrested immediately. Not eventually, not after more investigation. Now. He argued that the recordings provide probable cause for criminal charges, that allowing Trump to remain free while this evidence exists is a miscarriage of justice, that every day Trump isn't arrested is another day he could be destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses, or planning more illegal activity. Nadler has been in Congress for decades and seen countless scandals and investigations. For him to call for immediate arrest is extraordinary. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took it further. She gave a speech on the House floor calling Trump's operation a criminal enterprise. She listed names of people who should be arrested alongside Trump. Pam Bondi, who served in Trump's administration and allegedly helped coordinate legal strategies for overturning the election. Tulsi Gabbard, who's been accused of providing political cover and propaganda support. Other senior advisors who were allegedly in the planning meetings. AOC framed this as not just about Trump, but about taking down an entire conspiracy. She used language like RICO prosecution and organized crime. This wasn't metaphor or hyperbole. She was literally arguing for criminal enterprise charges against Trump and his team. Other members joined in, both progressive and moderate Democrats, some giving impassioned speeches about democracy and rule of law, others focusing on the specific legal violations and why immediate arrest is justified. The common theme was urgency. These lawmakers were arguing that the normal slow pace of justice isn't acceptable when you have recordings of a former president planning an attack on Congress, that extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary action, that failing to arrest Trump immediately would send a message that presidents truly are above the law. Republicans in the hearing were in an impossible position. Some tried to defend Trump by attacking the recordings as edited or taken out of context, but that's hard to sustain when the recordings are extensive and include multiple conversations with consistent themes. Some tried to argue this is all political persecution and that Democrats are weaponizing justice against their opponents. But again, hard to sell that when you've got Trump's own voice discussing criminal plans. Some Republicans just stayed quiet, not wanting to defend the indefensible, but also not wanting to break with their party. The result was a GOP response that was fragmented and mostly defensive. The demand for immediate arrest raises fascinating constitutional questions. Congress has oversight power. They can investigate. They can refer matters for prosecution. They can impeach. But can they actually order arrests? No, that's executive branch power. Law enforcement, whether DOJ, FBI, or other agencies, operates under executive authority. Congress can demand action. They can hold hearings. They can use political pressure, but they can't literally issue arrest warrants or send marshals to take people into custody. That's separation of powers. So when Adler and AOC and others are demanding immediate arrest, they're really demanding that the DOJ act on the evidence Congress has uncovered. They're making a political and moral argument that the evidence is so strong and so urgent that DOJ has no choice but to move immediately. They're trying to create public pressure that makes it impossible for DOJ to delay or decline prosecution. Is Congress using its platform and its authority to push the executive branch toward action it might otherwise be reluctant to take? The DOJ is in a difficult position here. They have their own investigations ongoing. Special counsel Jack Smith has been building cases against Trump for years, and they probably have most or all of this audio evidence already through their own subpoenas and search warrants. But DOJ has been methodical, carefully building cases that will withstand legal challenges. They're not inclined to rush based on congressional pressure. They want to move on their own timeline when they believe cases are fully ready. But Congress is now publicly demanding immediate action, creating political pressure that's hard to ignore. There's also the question of what immediate arrest would look like practically. Trump is a former president with Secret Service protection. You can't just send FBI agents to Mar-a-Lago and slap handcuffs on him without extensive planning and coordination. There are security considerations, questions about whether he'd be held in custody or released on bail, how to handle the perp walk and media coverage, whether to arrest him at night to minimize spectacle or during the day to maximize transparency. These are all questions that would need answers before any arrest could happen. And then there are the political ramifications. Arresting a former president, especially one who's still politically active and influential, would be unprecedented in American history. It would be seen by Trump supporters as proof that the deep state or the establishment or Democrats or whoever are trying to destroy him through lawfare. It would energize his base. It could lead to violence from extremists who view Trump's arrest as a call to action. Law enforcement would have to prepare for potential unrest. It's not just a legal decision. It's a security and political decision with massive stakes. Democrats arguing for immediate arrest know all of this. they're making the argument anyway because they believe the alternative is worse. They believe that if Trump can orchestrate an attack on Congress, get caught on tape doing it, and still not face arrest, then the rule of law is meaningless, that it establishes a precedent that presidents can do literally anything without criminal consequences, that it invites future abuses by Trump or others who would learn they can act with impunity. In their view, the risks of arresting Trump are outweighed by the risks of not arresting him. The audio recordings have also been leaked to media outlets and are starting to circulate publicly. Some networks have played portions of them. Transcripts are being published, and the public reaction is intense. Trump's critics feel vindicated. Finally, direct proof of what they've been saying all along. Trump supporters either claim the recordings are fake or argue that what Trump was discussing was legitimate political activity, not criminal conspiracy. The partisan divide is as deep as ever, maybe deeper. Okay, let's break this down. Point 1. Audio recordings directly implicating Trump in January 6th. Planning and cover-ups have been released by a federal judge over Trump's objections. These recordings include Trump's voice discussing how to disrupt electoral certification, what to do if violence occurs, and how to cover up evidence afterward. This is smoking gun evidence of criminal conspiracy and obstruction of justice, the kind of direct proof that can support serious federal charges. Point 2. Prominent members of Congress, including Jerry Nadler and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, are publicly demanding Trump's immediate arrest based on these recordings. They're not calling for more investigations or hearings. They're demanding actual arrest warrants, criminal charges, and prosecution. This is an unprecedented escalation from congressional oversight to public demands for criminal justice intervention. And they're not just targeting Trump, but his inner circle too, naming specific advisors who should be arrested alongside him. Point 3. Congress doesn't have authority to order arrests, but they're using their platform to create massive political pressure on DOJ to act. This is Congress pushing separation of powers boundaries by trying to force executive branch law enforcement to move on congressional timelines. It creates constitutional tension because DOJ wants to move methodically on its own schedule, but Congress is demanding immediate action based on evidence that's now public. In point 4, this represents a leap from political accountability through impeachment to criminal accountability through prosecution. Previous efforts to hold Trump accountable focused on impeachment, which is a political process. Now Congress is demanding criminal justice intervention, arrests, trials, potential prison time. That's a fundamental escalation that changes the entire nature of the accountability conversation and raises the stakes enormously. So why does this matter beyond the immediate drama? First reason, it's a test of whether anyone, including former presidents, can actually be held criminally accountable for attacking American democracy. Trump allegedly orchestrated an attempt to overturn an election through violence and intimidation. If that's true, and if audio recordings prove it, then he committed serious federal crimes. The question is whether the justice system will actually hold him accountable or whether his status as a former president effectively places him above the law. Second reason, it establishes precedent about what evidence is required and what actions are appropriate when a former president commits crimes. These audio recordings are direct, unambiguous evidence. If even this level of proof doesn't result in arrest and prosecution, what would? It sets a standard or fails to set one that will affect how future accountability efforts work. If Trump escapes consequences despite smoke and gun evidence, future presidents learn they can do anything. Third reason is about congressional power and how far Congress can push the executive branch on law enforcement matters. Separation of powers means Congress investigates and the executive prosecutes. But when Congress uncovers evidence this explosive and demands immediate action, it tests the boundaries of that separation. Can Congress effectively force DOJ to act through political pressure? Should they be able to? These are real questions being answered through this crisis. Fourth reason, it affects public faith in institutions and rule of law. Americans watching this need to see that the system works, that evidence leads to accountability, that no one is above the law. If Trump orchestrated January 6th and got caught on tape doing it and still faces no consequences, millions of Americans will conclude the system is broken and justice is only for regular people. That's corrosive to democratic legitimacy. Now, what comes next? DOJ has to make decisions about whether and when to arrest Trump. They have the audio evidence now. They've been building cases. Congress is demanding immediate action. Public pressure is mounting, but they also need to ensure any prosecution can succeed, that charges are properly brought, that cases can withstand inevitable appeals and challenges. Rushing could mean making mistakes that let Trump escape conviction. Trump's legal team will fight any arrest warrant or charges with everything they have. They'll argue the recordings are privileged or inadmissible. They'll claim selective prosecution and political motivation. They'll file motions to dismiss based on immunity or statute of limitations. They'll try to get cases moved to favorable venues. They'll delay and obstruct every step of the way. This will be the legal fight of the century. Congress will continue pushing more hearings, more public release of evidence, more speeches demanding action. They'll use their oversight power to keep pressure on DOJ. They might even consider legislation to strengthen or clarify their authority to compel prosecution in cases like this. Democrats see this as their moment to finally hold Trump accountable, and they're not backing down. Republicans are fractured on how to respond. Some will defend Trump no matter what, claiming the recordings are fake or taken out of context. Others will stay quiet, not wanting to defend the indefensible, but also not wanting to break with their party. And a few might actually break ranks and say the evidence is too strong to ignore. Those fractures could widen depending on what other evidence emerges and how the public reacts. Trump himself will go on the attack. He'll claim the recordings are doctored or misrepresent what was said. He'll accuse Democrats of staging a coup. He'll call for his supporters to protest or take action. He'll frame this as persecution and himself as a victim, and his messaging might resonate with his base even if the evidence is damning to everyone else. That's the power of partisan polarization. Facts don't matter as much as tribal loyalty. The political implications for 2026 and beyond are enormous. If Trump is arrested, it becomes the defining issue of the election cycle. Democrats run on holding him accountable and protecting democracy. Republicans either defend him and alienate moderates or distance themselves and alienate his base. If he's not arrested despite this evidence, Democrats use that as proof the system is rigged in favor of the powerful and call for reforms. Either way, this dominates political discourse. Here's my take. The audio recordings, if they're as described, provide clear evidence of serious federal crimes, planning to disrupt electoral certification, coordinating with people who attack Congress, obstructing investigations afterward. These are criminal acts, and Congress is right that such evidence demands urgent action. The question is whether our institutions are capable of holding a former president accountable, even when the evidence is overwhelming. The calls for immediate arrest are extraordinary, but understandable given the evidence. If we had recordings of any other person planning an attack on government institutions, they'd be arrested immediately. The fact that it's a former president complicates things practically and politically, but it shouldn't change the fundamental principle that criminals should face justice. Congress is trying to ensure that principle is upheld even for the most powerful defendants. The constitutional tensions this creates are real and significant. Congress pushing DOJ to prosecute on congressional timelines tests separation of powers. But sometimes institutional boundaries need to be tested when the stakes are this high. When democracy itself was attacked and evidence proves who orchestrated it, normal procedures might not be sufficient. Extraordinary situations sometimes require extraordinary responses. So where does this leave us? Congress has heard smoking gun audio evidence of Trump planning the January 6th attack. Lawmakers are demanding his immediate arrest along with his co-conspirators. DOJ faces enormous pressure to act quickly, even though they prefer methodical case building. Trump's legal defenses are weakening as more evidence emerges, and the entire country is watching to see whether a former president who attacked democracy will actually face criminal consequences. This is the accountability moment. Everything that's happened before, the investigations, the hearings, the reports, the referrals, all of it has led to this. Audio recordings of Trump in his own voice discussing criminal plans, Congress demanding arrest, DOJ deciding whether to act, the rule of law being tested against presidential power, and the outcome will define whether American democracy can survive an internal attack by its own leader. Stay tuned, because what happens next will be historic. Whether Trump is arrested or not, whether Congress's demands are heeded or ignored, whether the audio evidence leads to conviction or acquittal. Every step of this process matters. Every decision shapes the future. And we're all witnesses to a constitutional crisis that will be studied for generations. This is what accountability looks like when it finally arrives. Messy, controversial, urgent, and absolutely critical for the survival of democratic governance.